Hey everyone, thanks for logging on watching this video and this lecture on progressive muscular relaxation, which is going to be a technique that will go over its mechanisms, its uses, and its benefits among tactical populations, but general populations across the board. It's a valuable tool in assisting in trying to modulate your arousal levels for given situations and in using it as a performance aid to enhance your cognitive performance, physical performance, and overall just mindset going into a given task. In order to talk about why progressive muscular relaxation can be a valuable technique, we need to talk about situations that it's going to be used in, which are kind of going to be boxed into this performance anxiety category. This can kind of be referred to as general stage fright, but it's not specific to things like performances, but it is a heavily utilized intervention for people such as concert pianists, musicians, people who do public speaking, things where there's an audience and you go up on stage and typically have this somatic anxiety start to present itself in a physiological way, whether it's heart rate increases, you start sweating, you start jittering, you start feeling your muscles tense up, things like that that coincide with stage fright, but are translatable to many different situations where there's performance required of you at a high level. Now, I'm not saying that arousal is going to diminish your performance at all. It's actually going to do the opposite. You need to have a certain level of arousal and motivation and drive and somewhat you could probably call it anxiety because it's important to you. You want to perform well. The event might have a heavy consequence on your future. There should be some sense of sympathetic arousal. You want to have a given balance of this arousal combined with a controlled demeanor. You have the mindset that you've been there before, you've trained, you've prepared, and it's set you up to succeed. So having that in the background of your performance is just as important as having a level of arousal to get you psyched up to go into that given event. Let's go ahead and talk about the optimal level of arousal or the inverted U theory. So this graph over here on the right gives you a nice depiction of what I just previously talked about with finding that balance. So you'll see on the y-axis here, mental or physical performance as a artificial metric right here. There's really no quantifiable means of it, but low performance to high performance, meaning you're doing poor to great, and then the level of stimulus from low to high being bored at the very end of this inverted U. Then you have some sort of thing that motivates you to do well. That's AKA your interest in the event. And then in this medium, right in the middle of the inverted U, you see excitement as the broad categorization of the state you should be in when you're going in to give your best performance. Because if you're bored or you're fearful, that is not going to facilitate the most optimal performance. It's going to put you in a situation where you're lacking that sympathetic drive, the catecholamines, epinephrine, norepinephrine, dopamine, adrenaline, things like that. So those things are not present when you're in this given scenario over here. You're not tapped out on all those catecholamine neurotransmitters that get you up and going to fight or flight to some extent as just a baseline level of excitement. And then over here, those catecholamines are off the wall, overdoing themselves. They're not giving you a chance to perform the task that you're prepared to do. It's almost just inhibiting your ability to do this thing that should naturally be in kind of a flow state for you if you prepared for that event. So they can have an amazing productive role, or they could have a very deconstructive role depending on the level of release. Throughout the course of your career, you're going to find tools and strategies to counteract either of these situations. You need to have tools and modulators that allow you to increase your level of excitability or decrease it. And I want to go over a few different studies that highlight the efficacy for not only progressive muscular relaxation, but for tools like exercise or deep breaths. And a lot of these things have the crossover to every type of realm you could imagine. So there's a variety of studies that include the efficacy of all of these interventions, and I'm just here to name a few to give you some resources and background of how effective these are for various situations. Let's talk about this first one. This is a meta-analysis, meaning it's a concoction and a group of a ton of studies, the data all being presented in one uniform kind of So this study is a meta-analysis, meaning it's a lot of various studies done in the same realm or with the same idea in mind. So exercise as a modulator for arousal levels, aka how does acute exercise, meaning right after the effects of that training's bout, have an effect on performance? We're dealing with more of the cognitive domain, and we'll stick to that for this meta-analysis, but this is a large group set of data from various studies, all compiled into one nice conformed study. The overall synopsis of these studies was that there was a positive mean effect size change for cognitive tasks that were involving rapid decision making. So when the behaviors exhibited were automatized, meaning you could not think and preconceive what would be the best option, you just had to go for it. And this could be very cognitively and energetically demanding to the brain. And acute exercise had the ability to improve these tests with an average effect size of 0.2, meaning 20% greater performance on any given mean person that performed those tasks between control groups, people who were not given acute exercise and ones who were. So acute exercise, as soon as you did it, you performed the cognitive tasks after and you did 20% better. That's a pretty decent effect size and one worth mentioning. The next study I'll bring up actually had to do with progressive muscular relaxation, the technique that we'll be going over in specifics after in the next slide. But they were given an intervention to nursing students. It was 49 male, 49 female nursing students, and they were categorized based on their test taking anxiety levels. So there were individuals who experienced high anxiety prior to their tests and were given this opportunity to have this tool implemented into their routine and see if it did anything beneficial for them. And after the conclusion of the study, they saw that based on the Mann-Whitney anxiety scores prior to the test, the group that was given the progressive muscular relaxation task 2 times a day for 2 weeks leading up to that test saw significantly reduced levels of anxiety prior to their test and did or performed on a higher subsequent level of performance. The last study that I think is pretty cool from a mechanistic standpoint was done with a intervention on physiological size. So basically, just a deep breath hold followed by a long exhale with an exaggerated hold of 2 seconds, I believe is what the protocol stood for. So you take your deep breath in, hold for 2 seconds, and then nice long exhaled sigh. And they tracked a lot of physiological markers. This study looked at 34 participants, and they did 3 different blocks of 40 trials of showing them various images, some based positively, some negative. So ones that would give you a positive affect or just overall pleasing feeling, and ones that would kind of give you an eerie or unsafe or some sort of negative set of traits accompanied with that negative image. And they would either give you safety cues with the positive ones, of feeling very secure, or danger cues with the negative ones. So ones that typically, from a mechanistic standpoint, should elicit these responses of anxiety or calm. And they saw that between those images, when you were to perform the physiological sigh, there was a significant reduction in that physiological arousal level. So even though this maybe isn't something to take home to the bank as a physiological size improve my performance in every capacity in every setting ever, it does show that it has the potential to reduce your arousal levels from a sympathetic nervous system standpoint in isolation. So it's a tool that you could utilize, just deep breaths, exaggerated deep breaths, this physiological sigh as a means of reducing your arousal level if it's too heightened for a given time. Let's go ahead and talk about progressive muscular relaxation from a protocol standpoint. So this activity involves you finding a nice, safe environment where you can lie down, preferably in the dark. It's quiet. You can just be very introspective and kind of lock in on your internal body states because it's going to be an activity that is going to be most beneficial to you if you can assess the changes pre and post of each tension-filled action. You want to feel the sensations of your body change in the moment. And if you're doing things that are distracting, like the TV's on or there's people talking around you or you're outside and it's a chaotic environment, you can't really go too internal because there's so many things going on external to you. It takes your attentional focus away. But PMR, I'm going to refer to it as that from now on, is the process of you systematically going from your toes all the way up to your head with a series of intense muscular contractions followed by nice relief periods of a decrease in tension. So the way you would do it, you would take a nice deep breath in through your nose, and then you would contract. Maybe you squeeze your feet, curl your toes, do it as hard as you can, maximal force production to those muscles in particular for 5 seconds, and then go ahead and exhale through the mouth and release that tension for 5 to 10 seconds. There's various protocols. They all get after the same mechanism. It's no reason to beat your head over semantics of how many seconds for the contraction, how many seconds for the relief. It doesn't need to be as dialed as that. Then you would move up and you would take another deep breath in, and maybe you curl your toes towards your shin. You're flexing those ankle dorsiflexion muscles as hard as you can. And then you would take that exhale through the mouth and release nice and gentle and feel this kind of just sensation or state change within the muscle tissue downstream and just pay attention to those. And then you keep working your way up. Maybe point your toes away from you, flex your calves hard as you can. And same thing, just initiating it with a nice smooth inhale through the nose and then the exhale through the mouth. And you would continue this from quads, hamstrings, glutes, core, move on to the hands, squeeze your hands, forearms, elbow, extensor muscles, and then from there, facial muscles, things like that. So you would just work your way from down to up all the way through with those periods of nice solid tension and then a good release. And the mechanism that underlies this is neuronal top-down and bottom-up stimulation. So this is essentially meaning that there's a top-down loop connection from where your cerebral cortex is, your motor cortex are giving these outputs for your muscles to do these contractions at such a high rate of force production. And then those in return, those muscles are getting that stimulation from all of their sensory organs, the proprioceptors, the Golgi tendon organs, things that detect length changes in the muscle as well as tension changes in the muscle, and then give that feedback back to the brain, tell it to turn off. We have too much force and tension right now. We can turn off, release that signal from the alpha motor neurons, telling the muscles to do all this, stop what we're doing. So it's kind of this like intrinsically built relief system, tells us to stop doing what we're doing. So you're creating this artificial and abstract need to contract, and that contraction yields this output from the muscles of we don't want to be doing this, tell the brain to stop. And then that in return gives you this transient period of relief, decrease in arousal, and just a nice overall sensation of relaxation. Let's get into how to implement PMR. So if you're a beginner, if you do no form of meditation, no visualization practice, no mindfulness practices, this is going to fall under that same umbrella category of things, which all follow this same initial context to set yourself up in, where you go to a dark, quiet, peaceful, and safe environment, one that is going to allow you to go internal so you don't have to focus on external stimuli and get yourself out of this headspace that you need to be in to take full advantage of the PMR technique. And then you're going to implement it and practice it there. So one thing I like to do with this is kind of just before bed, if I'm lying there and I don't feel that relaxed, I'm still stimulated by thoughts from the day or responsibilities I have to do tomorrow. I go through this protocol in my head where I go from bottom to top, muscular activation at each muscle group with that period of release, and I'm extending those exhales. So kind of like we talked about with the physiological sigh, how that can decrease your sympathetic activation. You can get the same benefit during this by just having a nice long inhale followed by a couple seconds of a hold for that contraction, and then extend your exhale as long as possible. That's going to give you this diminished return on sympathetic activation and an uptick in the level of parasympathetic activation happening at the time. The next step is to identify situations that provoke your anxiety. So whether you're a person who does public speaking a ton, or you're a musician doing performances, or whether you're a first responder where you need to give a briefing, or you need to go in and do a special mission. Maybe you have your task book open for a task and you've never done it before, and that's giving you some state anxiety at the time because it's just not frequently in your life routine and it's something that's new and novel, and that's going to automatically have this new uptick in stress to get you prepared for that event. So you're going to see things come to the surface like sweating, heart rate increases, muscles might feel tense, your breath may feel short, and you maybe feel nauseous, things that coincide with this compromised level of activation and arousal that decrease our performance. So identify those situations where you get that somatic anxiety and then choose to implement it with the PMR technique in those given scenarios. Now that you've built this kind of rhyme and reason behind it, you've had some practical experience, you know what it feels like, you see the sensations, you know what you're looking for. This, in my equivalent, is kind of like the entire metaphor for utilizing the gym. You use it to have a controlled environment where you can overload your muscles, hone in on certain traits like strength, power, speed, agility, and then translate it to the actual realm that you need it for, aka your job, your occupation, your reason for living, whatever it is. So you want to do this to build up the skill portion of it in a nice, quiet, dark place that's safe, and then implement it out on the fire line when you're in a situation in your job where there's just a increase in arousal beyond an actual return from it. And that is it for my lecture on progressive muscular relaxation. Please feel free to comment any questions, concerns, things you want, and more information on surrounding this or other relaxation techniques. I'm always wanting to give my audience what they're looking for. So if this is something of keen interest to you and you want to find other routes to increase or decrease your arousal levels for optimizing performance, please reach out, leave a comment, subscribe, and get involved so I can give you more content tailored towards your specific needs. But thank you for coming in today and watching this lecture and bettering your performance in and outside of the job. Here are some references if you want to take a look at the studies that I mentioned. They're in the show note captions.